Hello, BookTube. I have a book tag for you, and one in an endless string of tags that I want to do. And it's like the Hydra. The minute I do one, two more pop up that I want to do. So I'm thinking that I may do a tag every day, and just why not until I get this backlog cleared away just a bit. And you would think that if that's true, I have a long backlog, that I would do them in order. But it really doesn't matter. I'm going to get to all of them eventually. And I saw a tag today that just cries out to be done. David Murphy did the finance book tag. It was only a matter of time. And hey, you don't have me to blame, okay? Because when I tried to circulate a petition to get rid of that Jason Harrigan guy, all of you thought I was being oh so mean. Oh, we love Jason. Oh, we love his enormous head and his wonderful accent. Okay, fine. Well, then you're on your own with this David Murphy guy, okay? I'm not even going to bother. Instead, we'll just do his tag, which is all about finance. Can you believe it? He said at the beginning of his video that this is the finance tag, but that he might do an economics tag. What's the difference? I thought those two things were the same. Anyway, the prompts are fantastic, so I'm going to do them, and I have some props here. I took the time to get some props together. Prompt number one. Again, I'm not responsible for this. Bear with me here. Diversification is the averaging out of independent risks in a large portfolio. Okay, if you say so. Hold up a few books we wouldn't expect to find on your shelves. Now, for me, that's going to be a little difficult because those of you who've been watching this channel for any length of time will know that I read a lot and I read a great variety. I think those of you who've been with this channel for a while have gotten to the habit of just, if I hold up a book and you think, boy, I wouldn't have expected you to have that, then your response has become over the years, well, I can't wait to hear what your reason is. In other words, I think I've trained a lot of people on this channel not to be surprised by anything I hold up on this channel, by anything you find on my shelves. But there is a steady stream of such books that come in and out of my possession every week, every day, because I do a lot of reviewing for Kirkus Reviews, and I get a lot of books from them that are not anything that I would ever read, that I would ever recommend, that I would ever keep, and they come and they go. But every once in a while, I get one of those that I really like. So I don't have a lot of these books that you wouldn't expect to find on my shelves, but I do have one. And oddly enough, it echoes something David Murphy held up the Catechism of the Catholic Church and said maybe this is something you wouldn't expect to find on my shelves, but here it is. And this is much the same. This is much similar. This is by Monsignor Dennis Regan, and it is Free and Holy Where You Are, The Daily Life of a Catholic. I don't think the finished book looks like this. Although maybe it does. This has a price tag on it, so maybe this is what it looks like. I got this to review for Kirkus Reviews, and I thought it was wonderful. A totally sinus-clearing, modern, renovative look at the Catholic faith today that acknowledges perfectly well in its beginning matter what a lot of the unfavorable characterizings of that faith actually are in the present day, and this just tackles the whole thing. Reminds the Monsignor will remind a lot of his Catholic readers why they got into the whole rigmarole in the first place. The Catholic Church takes it on the chin in the popular press quite often, and this book reminds you of all the good things and does it in a wonderfully 21st century way without turning the tables on almost anything. I loved it. Thought it was fantastic. Free and Holy Where You Are would definitely be a book you might not expect to find on my shelf. I would stress again, this type of book is on my shelf all the time. It just doesn't stay. It's incredibly rare. Incredibly. We're talking 365 books a year. It's incredibly rare in a given year that I will keep even one Kirkus book. Incredibly rare. And this one I'm going to keep. So I consider that to be ahead of the game. I don't think I could come up with even two more books that you genuinely would be surprised to find here. Let's see here. Prompt number 2 is past results are not indicative of future outcomes. Tell us about a book or author you disliked or were indifferent about on first reading, but gave a second chance and ended up liking. And the author here, well, the first one that came to mind is Joshua Ferris, whose first novel, Then We Came to the End, was a completely boring mimeograph job of a workplace novel that didn't have much of a plot and was meant to gripe. It was meant to be his farewell, I guess, to his days working in a cubicle and his Dave Barry style, oh, can you believe it, summary of that cubicle world. And I read it and was just, I was bored to tears, first of all, but I was also outraged because I thought, you got a book contract for this. This isn't even a book. And everything that he's done since then, the stuff where he has had to pull in his imagination instead of pulling up the notes that he jotted in the break room, everything since then has been fantastic, including The Unnamed, which is a book that that a lot of readers, a lot of my fellow critics, didn't know what to make of, and therefore decided they didn't like. I thought this guy's not put a foot, in my opinion, has not put a foot wrong since his smash hit debut. So Joshua Ferris would be a perfect example. One of the ways that you can tell this, for years and years on my my book blog, Steve Reads, I did a year-end roundup of the best and worst books of that year in a whole bunch of categories. I still do that, except Steve Reads has been folded under the aegis of Open Letters Review. But it still does happen every year. I'm meticulously keeping lists of all my reading experiences. And one of the sure ways that you can tell when a book has, an author has a flip-flop like that, happened with Joshua Ferris, because his debut was on the worst fiction of the year, and the next book that he wrote was on the best fiction of the year. So, and that's happened before. So, but he was the answer that came straight to mind. Then prompt number 3 is the effect of earning interest on interest is known as compound interest. Name a book that has aged remarkably well, or a book that gets better each time you read it. And I have a book in mind, one of my props. I've mentioned it on this channel before. It's an author I don't particularly like. And I read this book when it first came out and thought, I don't know what you were trying to do there, but it fails. Whatever you were trying to do, it fails. This is a classic example of a dead book, a book that's just inert. And I have periodically gone back to this author. The author is John Steinbeck. And I have periodically gone back to his fiction because he is canonical now, and I'd like to give authors a second chance. I know that doesn't always seem that way, but I hope, again, if you've been with this channel long enough, you know it's true. I like to give authors a second chance or a third chance. I like to think that maybe I'm wrong about them somehow. Who wouldn't want a new author to love? So I periodically go back to Steinbeck, and he baffles me. It baffles me why he is loved. But not this book. This book I go back to, and I the second time I read it, I think 15 years after it first came out, and the second time I read it, I immediately realized, oh my God, you are doing a whole bunch of things here that I just didn't see. I just plain didn't see them the first time. And that has been true. I have now read it another time after that, and it's the Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights. Now this has been brought out recently. I think it was, I don't remember who did it. Somebody brought this out in a nice trade paperback with a Christopher Paolini introduction, I believe. I have this one because it has the Michael Whelan fantasy artwork on the inset, on the step. This trade paperback is not long for this world, but as far as I know, the hardcover didn't look like this, and none of the other reprints have ever looked like this, that had the Arthurian stuff there. That is just terrific. You've got Merlin holding a book there, and you've got King Arthur and the stained glass. That's just a great picture, and the book is also great. It's funny and entirely adult and sardonic in a way that, I mean, this was Steinbeck's book. This was his White Whale. He thought about this forever and ever, wanted it to be a hit, a much bigger hit. It wasn't a hit in his lifetime. And ordinarily with books like that, with White Whale, Holy Grail books like that, the author is the only one in the world who doesn't see clearly what a bad idea it is. And then they eventually get to write the book, and the whole world gets to see that it's a bad idea. No, usually in the case like that, the author's nearest and dearest, their friends, their wives, their beta readers, don't tell them for some reason. This dream project of yours hasn't happened because it's bad. It's a bad project. But every once in a while, the author knows best. Ken Follett is a perfect example. He had been dreaming about a gigantic medieval historical novel forever and ever while he was writing espionage that was doing really well. Finally just decided to write that book, and it turns out his vision was correct, and his readers agreed. This was the best thing, the favorite thing they'd ever read by him. I don't know if that's ever going to be true of Steinbeck's King Arthur book. I think it's an off-the-road pick for Steinbeck, and will always remain so. But for me, it's a perfect example of a book that has improved every time I've gone back to it. Now, prompt number 4 is a firm's current ratio is the ratio of current assets to current liabilities. So, a ratio of 1 means current assets equal current liabilities. We're not done. The prompt goes on. If current assets are the books in your library you have read, and current liabilities are the books you have not read, is your current ratio above, below, or equal to 1? I did the math here. David Murphy, in his original tag, stresses that you do not need to know math to answer this question. And you can see how you don't, right? He's basically asking, if he weren't such a nerdosaurus, what's the ratio of unread to read books in your collection? That's basically what he wants to know. And we've already gone over on this channel. I got a lot of emails when I was doing my library tour in 2019. A lot of people emailed and said, I'm hearing this book is great, this book is fantastic, this book is unknown, this book is obscure. But the one thing I'm not hearing is I haven't read this book. We're not hearing that. It's book after book after book that you've read, that you remember, the plots, the names, the details that you've written about. But almost nothing is coming up here that you haven't read. That's entirely true. I keep the books that I've read and liked. And even, as David puts it in his video, even liking a book is not sufficient reason for keeping it. I have to feel like I will want it in addition to liking it. Plenty of novels that I read in a given year, I don't keep any of them, or almost none of them. And that is true. And the numbers reflect it. The books that I haven't read in my library are all on one shelf. They're all on the shelf, mostly. The huge majority, 99% of them, are on the work shelf out in the other room of advanced readers' copies, separated by month. And most of the rest of these things I have read, aside from there's a large number of Regency romances that I haven't read yet because I bought them in bulk up in Vermont. And there are some murder mysteries too. But again, the numbers are very small of books that I haven't read. I did the numbers. And it's 122 books that I haven't read and 4,115 that I have that are here. I don't know what that ratio would make, what my ratio would be, but that's pretty big. 4,115 to 122, that's pretty big. And that's my ratio. That's my my current ratio, I guess, or whatever. Then prompt number 5 is familiarity bias is the tendency of investors to favor investments in companies they are familiar with. What is a book you go back to out of familiarity? Now I have one prompt here, and that's The Lord of the Rings. This old trade paperback collection of The Lord of the Rings with the one ring bookmark right there. This is, the binding on these is terrible, the box is terrible, but this is the format that I originally knew The Lord of the Rings in. So I have other Lord of the Rings here. I have 1 volumes. I have a mass market box set of individual volumes. I have trades with movie covers on them, and I have a few 1-volume collections. But I go back to Lord of the Rings all the time. It has long since passed into the happy realm where it is I am no longer reading it critically, unless I'm called upon. If we do a Lord of the Rings read along, then I will read it critically. But I just bask in it. And there are a number of other things. The Jungle Books by Rudyard Kipling is another thing that I have read them so many times. Sherlock Holmes would be another one. John Carter of Mars. There's going to be the John Carter, the Barsoom novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs that I've read 80 million times a piece. We're doing the Marsathon. Me and a group of other booktubers are reading through the Barsoom novels for the rest of 2020. Stuff like that. Things like that. Lord of the Rings, Barsoom, the Jungle Books, Sherlock Holmes. Those things I go back to over and over again. And you will all have your own versions of that, I'm sure. Let's see here. Prompt number 6 is investors are already seeking alpha. They're always seeking alpha. Seeking a non-zero difference between a stock's expected return and its required return. What is an underrated book or a book that should be more well-known but isn't? And I have a prompt here. I have an example of this, and you would think, it's a Library of America set here, so you'd think how unknown can it be? But it's not well enough known to the American reading public. Most Americans have no idea that this treasure even exists, and it's the journals of John Quincy Adams. He kept a private diary. There's old John Quincy Adams. There's a young John Quincy Adams when he was a super hottie, and there's old John Quincy Adams. And the Library of America did a 2-volume set that is one of the best things they've ever made. It's typical of Library of America in that the editorial apparatus is very minimal. You're meant to just be there with the books. And John Quincy Adams was the most intelligent person ever to be president of the United States, and incredibly observant. and he kept a diary for years. And then I always think, whenever I come across some edition of it or whatnot, I always think, surely this should be better known to Americans. Surely it should be. I have known many, many, many high school students, college students, who don't even know this thing exists, much less ever have it assigned to them. In excerpt, you wouldn't assign a 2-volume thing like this, but you could assign, I don't know, maybe it's just that there's never been a really good 1-volume with a great introduction. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's never been a really accessible 1-volume abridgment that would introduce this to people. There was an abridgment like that about 50 years ago, maybe a little bit less than that, but I don't remember it catching on, so maybe that's it. But one way or another, this more people should know, and by know I mean read, the diaries of John Quincy Adams than do, certainly. Number 7 is a derivative is a security the payoff of which depends solely on the prices of other marketed assets. Tell us about a book you thought was derivative. And here I'm going to punt just a little, because I think that 99% of all of what is called literary fiction, modern literary fiction, is derivative. It's a whole bunch of other things too. It's just almost a complete waste of time. There'll be diamonds in the rough, but usually it's all just, and the reason why it's all derivative is not far to seek. It's because so much of this stuff comes out of writing workshops now. So much of it does. A huge percentage comes from a relatively small mill of MBA programs or MFA programs, and that can't help but enforce a kind of plastic conformity on the subject matter, on the end product. I think that I would lay the problem with the derivativeness largely at the feet of such programs, which seem to want to batter the individuality out of authors before they get them to market, which is a weird thing for a writing workshop to do. But I guess bullies, they can be expected to do that sort of thing no matter where you find them. So I'm going to punt just a little. I don't have any specific example. I'm just going to say 99.9% of all so-called literary fiction. Then question number 8 is a share repurchase is when a company uses cash to buy back its own stock. Tell us about a book you own too many copies of, and for me it's Moby Dick. I think David said for him it's Anna Karenina. For me it's Moby Dick, and I don't know why. But I noticed it a long time ago. I noticed it about 25, 30 years ago that every time I see a copy of Moby Dick, I buy it. A used copy of Moby Dick, I buy it. If it's not one that I already have, and even occasionally if it is. And as a result, in this tiny little space, I have probably 11 or 12 different editions of Moby Dick. I was actually assembling them at one point. When we were coming up on our read-along of Moby Dick, I put a copy of Moby Dick on the shelves behind me, and each day as I was making videos about some other subject, I would add another edition of Moby Dick, and that's when I realized all afresh how horrifyingly many copies I have. I don't know why it is with Moby Dick. I have no idea. One copy's all you need. It's not even a case of Anna Karenina where you at least should be savoring different translations. One copy's all you need, and yet I have multiple. I don't know why. And then let's see. Question number 9 is the Federal Reserve is the lender of last resort. What is a book your mom or dad bought for you? Pretty good question. And I have one. I have a prop here that comes from me sainted Ma, who was not a fan of reading because, as she said, I'm saving my eyes. When she got to be incredibly old, having successfully avoided reading for her whole life, and she would say to me, I'm saving my eyes. I would say to her, well, Ma, what are you saving them for? The organ donation bank? And she would say, that's your mother you're talking to, But years and years and years ago, I was a happy member of the History Book Club. The History Book Club, the Military History Book Club, the Book of the Month Club. These used to be really good ways to get books in the mail when I wasn't reviewing. At the time I wasn't reviewing. They used to be really good because they would offer discounts. They would offer special editions just for club members. Science Fiction Fantasy Book Club was the same way. There was a Mystery Book Club. As far as I can tell, the modern incarnation of the History Book Club doesn't really do that. It's just a way for you to get these books without going to the bookstore, but it's not saving you a substantial amount. And they don't seem to have, if I remember correctly, they don't seem to have anything like the selection of original volumes that they once had. Books that they make that you can only get through them. And I'd be willing to bet if I looked, I'd see that the same is true of Science Fiction Book Club. If it exists at all, it's probably just a way to market normal books. I don't read the Book of the Month Club is the same way. Every month you get a selection of books. They change the spine. They put their imprint on the spine. But the book is the same as you would get at a bookstore. And there are no, as far as I could tell, there are no Readers Book of the Month Club special editions of any kind. Maybe I just didn't look around the sites enough. But once upon a time, the History Book Club was so much fun. So much fun. I used to love getting their brochure in the mail every month. And just, you start to ponder, okay, well, I'm only going to allow myself one book. And I've got so many points accrued, and will it count? And can I apply them towards this thing? And do I want to pull the trigger on my bonus points now or whatnot? And there was no internet. So the description of the book in the pamphlet that you got in the mail was the only thing you had to go on. And I used to pore over that thing, just pore over it. And at the time, I was living with me sainted Ma. She had an enormous house that she had this big rackety thing all to herself. And she was getting a little bit old to maintain, care for, and even spend time in such a house. So I got the enormous benefit, the enormous boon of getting to know my mother as a friend instead of a family member. And we became best friends. And it was tremendous. It was a tremendous, tremendous lucky thing. And I used to spread that catalog out on the table and just study it in detail and take notes. And she used to watch from time to time and say, "Don't you have enough books?" And then one day, out of the blue, I'll never understand why. She's not around anymore, so I don't get to ask her. I'll never understand why she did it. But one day, out of the blue, she said, "Why don't you pick a book from that thing, and I'll buy it for you?" So I naturally agreed, and I picked a book. It's by Gail Christensen, and it's In the Presence of the Creator. It's a biography of Isaac Newton. And I loved it. I'm sure that I'm maybe biased towards it emotionally, but I think it's the best Newton biography that I've ever read. I've read all the ones in English, and I think it's the best one so far. It beats even the ones that have come later. And it was a gift from me sainted Ma, who was not a big fan of reading. So there you go. I think that counts. And then number 10 is to tag people, and David adds, "But he'll get it if you don't." he realizes on some level how socially unacceptable he is, but these are still great prompts, so I'm hoping that everybody tags everybody. And I have people that I want to tag. I want to tag Amy at Zoe Beck. I want to tag Jack at Rambling Raconteur. I don't think I've ever tagged you before. Alex at What Page Are You On? Let's see here. Mike at Pints and Paperbacks. Mark at Richards and Reeds, of course, two of my fellow Mars-a-thon members. And also Jason at Byways and Bookland. I can't remember if David tagged him or not, but if not, we're all going to be spending time inside. We might as well do tags together. So that is the fine... and of course, Britta. I wouldn't want a tag to go by without tagging Britta. She might get lonely. But anyway, that is the finance book tag. And it was a lot of fun. I'm going to get on to other tags, though, so I just thought I'd do this one because it's fresh on my mind. But I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.